All right, well, welcome to Don't Let Your Enthusiasm Exceed Your Energy. My name is Rob Dumovic. I'm an 11,000-hour professional flight instructor. I've flown over 70 different types of aircraft, to include 2 blimps, 1 flying car, 1 helicopter, and 1 fighter jet. The rest of it was all GA. I've done a little bit of corporate flying, never in the airlines because I like to fly upside down, and I hear they don't like it when you do that with a 7.3. Boeing's got enough PR problems right now. But very honored to be asked by Rich and the folks at Community Aviation to present this topic here today. And I've got some other instructors out here that are going to be helping us out. So if you see them in the beige vests, they'll be working with you in the sims. And I also want to incorporate them into the session and the audience here today so that everybody's getting the same message. With the amount of folks in here today, I think we're going to be able to break this up into a ground session, to the sims for some maneuvers, come back, debrief that, think about a more high stress environment where we can use the lessons that we learned, and then move back to the sims all as one group in order to try now to meet the demands of what the second session is going to be. If we run out of time, if you're willing, we'll stay for an extra 20 minutes or half hour after the main debrief, and we'll fly those last scenarios in the sims, because I think they're very, very valuable information and techniques and skills. My lead assistant today is going to be Mike. Mike flew F-18s. Don't hold that against him if you're an Air Force fan, but he's a heck of a guy, and he's in the black shirt with the red Specialized logo. Awesome dude, so feel free to ask us questions at any time. But with that, let's kick this thing off with why we're here with Community Aviation and how we're trying to change the way that we teach. And that's what this is. This is an experiment in optimal learning.
The F-18 NATOPS contains everything they want you to know about your aircraft. I'm assuming you know the book inside and out.
Damn right.
Yeah.
Damn straight.
You got it.
So welcome to Don't Let Your Enthusiasm Exceed Your Energy. We are going to be talking some very foundational elements today. I'm not going to be going into Lagrangian mathematics or Boyd's energy maneuverability theory or anything like that, but those elements all came from what we're going to talk about today. And it's not only applicable to fighter aircraft, but also in our GA world. The laws of aerodynamics work for all fixed wing aircraft, so we might as well start learning how to operate within those parameters and really take those to heart as foundational methods for us in the aircraft. And I'm going to be focusing on the pilot input that results in an outcome rather than the outcome that we want to have happen, and try to figure out what those pilot inputs are to make it happen. Kind of blew through the introductions already, sorry about that. Anyway, so what I want to encourage during this process is that you all become 4-year-olds. What does a 4-year-old do whenever you tell them to do something?
Ask why.
They ask why. Why is my favorite question, because there always needs to be an answer to why. It can't be because I said so. I mean, it could be, but in the instructing world, that doesn't lay a very strong foundation. We also want to encourage, there's no such thing as a dumb question. So if you have your own why, feel free to ask. I want you to do that. This is an area where if we don't know, now we get to admit it as instructors and say, let's find out together. Let's look it up. Let's use our resources. And then the other very popular answer is it depends. So we can ask questions that have very complicated answers, and we just need to get a little more detail, a little more information. I was in an FAA seminar with a bunch of FAA lawyers talking about regs, and whenever somebody asked a question, the lawyers always said, well, it depends. And we always had to dig deeper into these things, and so I want to encourage you to dig deeper into this. This is a judgment-free zone. You're not in jeopardy. There's no members of the FAA here, are there? By law, you have to tell me. Yeah, go ahead.
So Rob, you know the FAA, right?
No, I have no idea.
Okay.
For today, you're not.
All right.
You're not going to violate anybody in this room for asking a question, are you?
I'm not flight standards, so.
Great. So there, he's here to help. He's here to learn just the same as everyone else here. So I want you to be free to ask your questions today. And I also want you to feel free to make mistakes. We're going to be in the sims, which are not a real airplane. I get that, but that also means if you screw up real bad in the sim, it's not a real airplane. So we can learn from those mistakes. We can learn from those. And one of my favorite Billy Joel songs is a song called Second Wind. And he has a lyric in there that says, "You're not the only one who's made mistakes, but they're the only thing you can truly call your own." By making a mistake in a sim while you have maybe another member of your team observing you, well, they can learn from your mistake as well and potentially not make the same one, or they will have the ability to recognize when they're making the same mistakes or going down that same path and make a different choice, have a different outcome. And so that's the good news there. How many private pilots do we have in here? Good. Instrument commercial? Couple. CFI? Excellent. And everybody in a beige vest, of course. Okay. Anybody higher than that? Any ATPs? All right, cool. Yeah, yeah. Excellent. So we've got all level of folks. Any student pilots? Ah, yes, student pilot. Maverick was here. I don't know where he went, but that's okay. Oh, he went to the other room?
Yes.
So disappointed. Mike, Maverick went to the other room.
Yeah, I know he did. I'm going to bring him back.
No.
But his dad signed him up for that. So.
It's fine. He can stay over there. That's okay. So the CFIs in here already know the levels of learning. We have rote, which is the memorized information that you have about your airplane. My engine is an O235 L2C. It makes 115 horsepower, 2,700 RPM. It's a horizontally opposed direct drive, air-cooled carburetor, equipped normally aspirated engine. Great. What does that mean? I don't know. So now we have to use that rote information to then get to the level of understanding where we go, oh, carburetor, it's not fuel injected, we have a Venturi, and if it's got a carburetor, more than likely it's got carb heat, because ice can form in there. So now we can start to understand and apply, get to those higher levels of learning, and then the correlation level. Now we're using information that we've learned in one area to deal with a new scenario. As flight instructors, we usually have a student pilot for 40 hours, while the national average is 70. So you got them for 70 hours. And you cannot, in 70 hours, show an applicant every single scenario that they're ever going to face in their flying career. But what you can do is give them the baseline, the foundational information they need to, when they come up with a new scenario or environment, to take the pieces and parts of what they already know and make a new tool to deal with what they've got. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get to this correlation level as quickly as possible in our learning. And so this may be a little bit non-traditional, or how you've already taught in the past, but one of the main takeaways that I like to use is I teach pilot inputs. It will get a response, and the responses will be pretty much universal, but historically we teach, hey, raise the nose. Okay, how? Do I use the force? No, you gotta use that thing in front of you. Oh, okay. So pitch, roll, yaw, those different combinations, and if anybody has been through Rich Stoll's Learn to Turn, a lot of the concepts are in there as well. There's a lot of meshing on that. So I want to encourage you to have a growth mindset as we go through these 9 principles of light airplane flying. We're going to be in the mechanic side, too far, using energy management, or talking about energy management today, and how we exchange different types of energy in our airplane. So that being said, I want to make sure everybody here starts out with the same level of energy. I want everybody to stand up, please. Oh yeah, I hear the groans. I hear the groans. I know, it's 8:30 in the morning in Oshkosh after a whole long week. Who's gonna catch it? Who's gonna catch it? It's going that way. Yay! Come on, set it back up. So, throw it. It's an airplane. There you go. Perfect, great. How come this thing just doesn't stay in the air? Gravity. Gravity's acting on it. Mike, either send it to me or somebody random. Great. With regard to, oh, I'm losing my wire. With regard to energy in the airplane, we can obviously see, hey, yeah, this thing isn't staying up forever, it's a glider. Well, I don't want you to stand up forever either. But I also don't want you to be super nervous about who I'm going to throw this to next and maybe who's going to have to try to catch it in front of everybody else. I've already dropped it, so it's okay. The bar has been set. Go ahead and sit back down. I'm not going to throw this thing at you anymore. But if you see me pick it up, wake up. All right. This wire is going to drive me nuts. Oh, well.
That's what we used to use erasers for.
Oh, yeah. I used to throw pieces of candy.
Erasers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nobody wants to eat an eraser. I mean, maybe a 4-year-old. Don't be 4-year-olds in that regard. Just ask why. All right. So, types of energy. What is energy? My dad, when I was growing up, he was a computer programmer, combat marine in Vietnam. You wouldn't necessarily think he was, the most intellectual of people if you ever met him. But strangely, he did 5 years in the seminary, did his senior year in high school, and then joined the Marine Corps. So that was quite a swing in mindset. But he used to say to me, energy is the ability to do work. What is work? Work is change over time. So I just had everybody stand up. Everybody got out of bed already this morning. You have changed positions. You have changed where you were. So you have done work. Where did the energy come from to do that work? Did everybody have breakfast? I gotta know. Did you have coffee? Tea?
Water.
Water. Well, okay. You're better than I am. So, but you're still burning energy. You're still, you've got your stored energy inside your body. Anybody that ate breakfast or is drinking a Red Bull or drinking coffee, where'd my Red Bull go? Where'd it go? I don't know where it is. I don't think I need it right now. We have to have energy to do things. Well, the airplane is the same. It's just not an organic being like we are. So where does our energy come from in the airplane? Fuel. Absolutely. Good job. So we've got 100 low lead in our airplanes. If you're flying an airplane that burns Jet A, awesome. We've got the GAMI 100 unleaded gas coming out nowadays too. So we have different sources for our energy. And in order to change positions or change altitude or change speed or any of those kind of things, everybody here drives, right? Anybody here ever passed a car on the highway or on a 2-lane road that was going too slow? What'd you have to do?
Accelerate.
Had to add energy, had to accelerate, had to put your foot to the floor. Or getting on the highway. Highway on-ramps for accelerating, not for holding 35 mile an hour until you get to the merge with the 80 mile an hour traffic. It's not gonna work out for you. Put your foot down. So, with the airplane, we can only convert one type of energy into another. So we have basically two types of energy. The fuel. Which type of energy do we suspect that the fuel is? Potential or kinetic? Potential. You see how easy some of these answers are? How do we exchange that potential energy and turn it into kinetic? Spark plugs. Yeah, we got to mix it with air, put it into the engine, combustion process. Combustion moves the piston connected to the connecting rod moves the crankshaft, turning it from linear motion into rotational motion. Crankshaft is generally direct driven to the propeller, and the propeller turns that combustion, that burning of the fuel into kinetic energy in the form of spinning prop. Spinning prop grabs the air and moves it, turns it into One of the four forces.
Thrust.
Thrust. Absolutely. Thrust acts which direction? Forwards. It's rearward, but it propels us forwards. So it's the force that makes us go forward. And so we turn that thrust into what other form of energy? First. Let's say first. First thing you do when you have full power, what are you doing?
Speed.
Speed. You're gaining speed. So we're turning potential energy into one form of kinetic energy, and Mr. Newton said equal and opposite, blah, 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 blah. Airplane go faster. Once it's going fast enough, our wing starts to work. When our wing's working, it makes what other of the four forces? Lift. Absolutely. So now the wing starts making lift, and our 2,500 pound airplane, once we start making more than 2,500 pounds of lift, the airplane goes where? Up. Turning our speed, which was kinetic energy, into potentially, you're absolutely right, in the form of altitude. So now we're taking the energy that we've stored in our gas, the dead dinosaurs, burning them, turning them into speed, converting that back into altitude, back into a potential energy. Okay, cool. So we do this exchange, and once we're up there, up at a high altitude, if we lose the engine, how do we maintain our speed?
Pitch down.
Yeah, we pitch down. We exchange now that potential energy of altitude back into air speed. And I don't think there was a greater master at doing so than Mr. Bob Hoover.
An airplane only recognizes airspeed as far as its flying qualities are concerned. Most people are most concerned when they have an engine failure. There isn't any reason to really be concerned about losing an engine unless you have a very low airspeed, because that's the only thing the airplane recognizes. If you have a lot of airspeed or an adequate airspeed, the airplane's just as maneuverable, just as controllable as with both engines running. And so in this particular case, I'm demonstrating the same preciseness of handling qualities with one engine out.
He's shut off both engines. Bob is going to try an 8-point roll with both engines shut down. Here he goes. That beeping sound is Bob's stall alarm. When it goes off, Bob must react quickly.
For all dead stick maneuvers, you have to start from enough altitude to convert your altitude into another form of energy, which is airspeed. The only thing in this particular case that you have to worry about is having enough speed on entry to complete the maneuver and then be positioned to land in the event you might not be able, for some unknown reason, to start the engines.
Up to this point, we thought we'd seen some pretty spectacular flying, but Bob isn't through yet. For his finale, he shut down both engines and put it all together.
We're building up the airspeed. You'll hear the engines go off. We're pulling up now, leading off airspeed as we pull up and over the top, holding 3 Gs in this particular maneuver, bending it right on around, absolutely quiet and still here on the top. Diving back down once more, 110, 115, 120, 150, 180. Building up airspeed, there we are, back up to our 200. Trees coming up at us, pulling up and rolling. Looks like a well-planned maneuver. We're going to end up right where we wish to be. Out of a 360-degree barrel roll. Got the airspeed right where we wanted it to be. Looks good all the way. Looks like we got a good one right on around and into the land. 30 miles an hour at this point. Dropping the nose again, killing off the airspeed, pushing it right on down, and here we go. Just perfect. Right off and in the grass. We'll land in the grass this time, or right on the edge of this runway. Got it, just a little kiss there.
Bob Hoover, executive, test pilot, and thrill seeker.
So did we see there? Don't try that at home, please. I tried in 2014 to put together a power off aerobatic routine, a la Bob Hoover in the Super Decathlon. And I was like, I'll put together some maneuvers. Let's start off with a hammerhead. And I pulled to the vertical, and I didn't have any of the normal cues that I would normally have for when to kick. And I put my foot to the floor for the pivot, and nothing happened. I went, oh no, as I went sliding backwards through the sky. So don't try this at home, please. But what types of energies did we see during that sequence of events? In a transport category airplane, nonetheless. What did we see?
Well, didn't the weight of that large airplane help him because he had such a large, heavyweight object versus your light airplane?
Potentially, yes, with the exception that the acceleration due to gravity, which is what he's going to be exchanging altitude for airspeed, that acceleration is constant. The Shrike Commander, or the Shrike was a rather slick airplane aerodynamically, so it doesn't necessarily have the drag. But conservation of energy and momentum, it took more energy to get him to a higher energy state, but he was exchanging it from 0 back to 1,000, if we're just throwing random numbers out there. But he did have to exchange it. And he had to do so in a manner that he could go from 0 altitude and a very high airspeed to a very high altitude, and what did I say? Very low altitude and very high airspeed to a very oh boy, starting to keep track, right? High altitude, low airspeed, and back down without the deficit. Something had to be traded there. Because if he did, energy, there's entropy. We don't get out 100% of what we put in. So when he came back down on that loop to the same low altitude, do you think his airspeed was higher or lower or the same as when he started? Lower. It was lower, absolutely. There's losses due to drag, and it's not a perfect system, and all kinds of bad things that are going on with the airplane there. But he absolutely had to know that and account for that in the planning of all of those maneuvers. So he was exchanging at first, especially in the last half, he used the engines, he used the fuel to get himself to a high speed at a low altitude, shut them down, and then turn that back into altitude, back into airspeed, back into altitude, and then put the gear out. What do you think the gear did? Drag. Absolutely. Hurting his kinetic energy, limiting now severely the amount of time he had left in the air. And so then he had to get it to the runway, do what he needed to do to maneuver to touch on one tire, swap it over to the other, and then finally land the aircraft. And Bob also was very famous for he would do that exact same sequence and pull up straight to the announcer stand, and the aircraft would come to a stop, and he would have the door already opening as it was stopping, and he'd step out of the aircraft. He had managed the energy so well, he didn't even have to be at the seat anymore, and he knew it was going to stop. So, has anybody here seen Bob Hoover fly? And autographed. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, any questions about exchanging the energy? Okay, fuel turned into thrust, turned into speed, turned into altitude, and now you're playing the game of exchanging one for the other. So, when we get into the sims, we're going to have power, we're going to have a throttle, we're going to have the ability to manipulate that particular control. What is the range of motion of that control? In the most basic terms, how far up can we push it? All the way. How far back can we pull it? All the way. And is there a time when we may need all of it? Yeah. Is there a time when we may need none of it? Yeah. So it's up to you as the pilot to be willing and able to use the controls to those extremes. So with energy and with aircraft, there's something that I liked to call the language of the airplane, and I thought I was rather unique in this and how the airplane talks to me. And on Wednesday, Mike had put up a graphic from 1918 where some Army major was talking about the sense and the feel of the airplane and how it communicates to you. And I was like, dang it, I'm not original in this at all. But it's so true. The airplane talks to us. It talks to us and tells us what it's doing, what it wants, whether you're doing a good job. I remember when I first started tailwheel training, I was flying a 1971 Citabria 7 ECA. I was already a commercial single engine land working on my multi. And the first takeoff, down the runway like that, you know, climbing out, 700 feet AGL, put the stick to the left and the nose went to the right, and I went, oh, that's what my feet are for! Holy cow, I'd never seen adverse yaw so pronounced. And then once I knew what to look for, I could see it in the other airplanes. In 1971, they weren't building in super fancy freeze ailerons and differential ailerons and interconnected rudders and ailerons to help you center the ball while you're maneuvering. It was just a raw airplane, kind of like a loud talker. Really getting right up in your face. Hey, good to see you. How you doing? How's that thing on your back? Did you get that taken care of? Nobody else needs to know about that. Whereas the Cessnas and Pipers and Cirruses and things like that, Bonanzas for today are built to be easy to fly. And so they only whisper to you some of these things. Oh, hey, if you want to put in a little rudder right now with your aileron, you can. It's okay if you don't want to. That's all right. But it's still there. It's still there if you know what to look for. And so that's one of the language of the airplane things that I like to talk about. It will show you, looking out the front, what it wants, what it's doing, how it's responding to your inputs. Hey, no, that's not good. I got it. There we go. So how do we sense? What are some other ways that we sense energy in the airplane?
Noise.
Noise.
Open the window, yeah.
Open the window.
Yeah, we hear.
You must have a really good noise canceling headset if you have to open the window to hear the. Awesome. So noise. Wind. So how do we tell if we're at a high energy state based on noise? There's more of it. What about when we're low energy? Less of it. Yeah. Was anybody here Sunday at the Theater in the Woods at night talking to the champions of aviation? Brian Udell did his talk. Has anybody heard of Brian Udell? Brian Udell, back in 1995, I think it was, ejected from an F-15E Strike Eagle at Mach 1.2 and survived. It was a night training flight. He thought he was in a 60-degree right-hand turn. His instruments were telling him he was in a 60-degree right-hand turn, but his ears told him he was going way faster than the 400 knots that his heads-up display said he was at. And so he looked down at his little standby instrument, and it was brown on brown with brown highlights. That means you're headed towards the ground. With 0.3 seconds left until there was he was at the point of no return, the ejection seat got him out of the aircraft. That sequence of events and him hearing the airplane's energy state saved his life that night. Okay, cool. So we can use sound. What do the controls feel like at different energy states? What about when we're slow? Mushy controls. Went up for a hammerhead, put the pedal in, and nothing happened, and that was a dead pedal. What about high speed? What do the controls feel like? Firmer, heavier, yeah. Unless you're flying my favorite airplane, the Extra. Those controls are tuned to feel the exact same at 200 knots as they do at 0. It's a beautifully balanced machine. German engineering all the way. To the point where I got to add stuff to the trailing edge of the ailerons to make it feel differently, to actually give it some feel. Otherwise, it's just too twitchy. It's difficult to fly precisely. But all of these things give us clues as to energy in the airplane. What's another thing that we feel or sense in the airplane? Go ahead.
I use a back cushion and a seat cushion, and I'm really nestled in.
Okay.
Just to feel.
Okay.
Everything.
Just to feel connected, so you feel all the motion of the aircraft.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good. You feel the accelerations of the airplane. What's another phrase that we would use or term that we would use for acceleration in the airplane?
Load factor.
Load factor, absolutely. Load factor, more commonly referred to as G-force. If you feel like you're being pressed down in the seat, that's load factor. When does load factor happen? When we, the pilot, command it. We make it happen. So if you're pulling or pushing, you may feel more or less load factor. Absolutely, more or less G-force. And so we need energy to maneuver. At a 60-degree bank angle, how much G is required to maintain a level flight?
Double.
2. You got to double it. And it goes up exponentially from there as the bank angle increases, but 60 degrees and 2 Gs is a nice little frame of reference. For our private pilot steep turns 45 degrees, you're about 1.3, 1.4, just enough to feel. And if you're doing a good job during your steep turn, you should feel that. It's not enough to make Mike do the full-on anti-G strain that he would do in the F-18, but it's something I want you to be aware of while you're maneuvering the aircraft, especially in the steep turn, because it's the magnifying glass for your technique. I want you to pay attention to what that feels like. Not to pat myself on the back, but during my CFI double eye check ride, my chief instructor, who already knew that I've been flying aerobatics for a couple of years at this point, for the unusual attitude part of the check ride, told me to close my eyes, put my head down, and give him a left-hand steep turn. And when he said recover, to fix the scenario, fix what I found myself in. I did 5 360s before he said, okay, this is pointless. Hadn't lost any altitude because my butt was calibrated to what that G was supposed to be. Now, would you use that in the real world instrument? Heck no, your body will lie to you. But if you're at least in tune and aware of what you should be approximately feeling, it will be a nice coincidence or feeling when you are in maneuvering flight. So pay attention to those things. That's a language of the airplane. The sound, the feel, in terms of both G-force and maybe even vibration or the feel of the controls, all of those things are language of the airplane elements. Now, energy, the wing needs energy in order to produce lift. What happens if it no longer has that? What's the wing do?
Stops flying.
Stalls. Yeah, it stops flying in the form of a stall. Stall good or stall bad? It depends. Stall from 1 inch, right over the runway, on center line, wind corrected. Stall good, stall bad? Stall good, stall good. Stall from 12 feet, still bad. Okay, so when does a wing stall? When it exceeds the critical angle of attack. At critical angle of attack, it's doing the most work it can possibly do for a given density, wing, and area, and speed. It's the most it can possibly do. So stall good, stall bad. What's another time that stall is good? What if we don't want to break our airplane? We talked about load factor a little bit, G-force on the airplane. Does our airplane have a G limit? Depending on what you're flying, utility category 4.4, normal category 3.8, transport category 2.5, aerobatic plus 6 minus 3. All right. Energy is needed for maneuvering. Excessive energy while maneuvering can break the airplane. So, has anybody seen a chart like this or graph like this before? Mike's just, yeah, man. So, if we wanted to maintain altitude, or maintain, let's do it this way. Let's say we wanted to maintain a pitch attitude of about, there's carpet there, 10 degrees nose up. If we didn't add any power, but changed this pitch attitude, what are some things that would happen to the aircraft and its energy? What would happen? Airspeed goes down. So then what happens to lift? Lift decreases. So then where's the nose go? It falls. Well, I want to maintain it at 10 degrees. So what's my pilot input to bring it back up? I pull back. Bring that nose back up. What happens to the speed? Decrease. What happens to lift?
Decrease.
Where's the nose go?
Down.
I don't want it to go down. What do? Can I do that forever? No. Eventually, in this particular scenario, I will get to normal stall speed. 1G unaccelerated stall speed of the aircraft, which in this case for this airplane looks like it's about 65-ish, 62 miles per hour. The number doesn't really matter. Everybody here has stalled an airplane, right? Done a power on, done a power off. Everybody here's landed an airplane, right? Is there any relationship between those three things? Yeah. Where was the yoke during all of those? Yeah, it's back. So when we stall the aircraft, which is when we exceed the critical angle of attack, where was the yoke? It's back. So now the correlation level to this learning is that the yoke is your angle of attack controller and indicator. Back in 1997, Chuck Yeager was doing a ride in an F-15, and they were filming him as the crew chief was strapping him into the aircraft, and the crew chief was pointing out the instrumentation of the F-15 like Chuck Yeager doesn't know. And they pointed out, like, this is the angle of attack indicator, and he goes, that's the stupidest instrument you could have put in this airplane. If you don't know your AOA, you shouldn't be flying. Well, that's a bold statement, Chuck. That's a bold statement, but his point was, every aircraft since the Wright Flyer has an angle of attack indicator in it. And it ain't pitch attitude. Because you can stall at any attitude, stall at any airspeed. But I guarantee that when it happens, that yoke is where? It's back. And it's all the way back. Now, any questions on that? That's a super fun one. Maneuvering speed. What's maneuvering speed get us? Turns. Yeah, when we're doing maneuvers.
It'll stall before it breaks.
Plane will stall before it breaks. We do our maneuvers at maneuvering speed or below maneuvering speed, so if we screw that up somehow, the airplane won't break, it'll stall. What is a stall called when it happens above normal stall speed? VS or VS1 or VSO. What's that called? Accelerated stall. All the CFIs here know that. The people who are below that, that's fine. You can you're learning it today. Cool. An accelerated stall. Stall at above normal stall speed. So anywhere between normal stall and maneuvering speed, if you take that pitch controller, whatever it is, stick, side yoke, side stick, yoke, and pull it all the way back, the wing will go whee, and it'll quit. It'll generate some load factor before it quits. And in this case, with this particular aircraft, up at maneuvering speed, it will generate 4.4 Gs, which this graph is apparently for a utility category aircraft. It will generate 4.4 Gs, and then it will stall. What's the G load go to once the wing quits flying? 1. 0 is a great guess because you're gonna feel that in your seat. Generally, it just goes to 1 on the wing. Now, let's take our 2,500 pound airplane and let's round some numbers a little bit. So let's turn 4.4 Gs just into 4. Our wing is designed to support our 2,500 pound airplane at 4 Gs, which is 10,000 pounds worth of work. If our wing, which is designed for 10,000 pounds worth of work, suddenly drops down to supporting its own weight, which is 500 pounds, can we break that wing? It's designed for 10,000 and it's only doing 5. Can we break it? Nah. So that's the good news of maneuvering speed. The wing will stall before it exceeds the design limits of the structure. Now there is a slight problem with metal. It has a memory. So the more you bend it like a paper clip, it will eventually fail. But they tested these things in the development phase and the certification phase. They know that it's got, let's just throw out a random number, 1 million cycles, 1 million flexes on it. And so if you are going slightly faster than VA and you pull back to your chest and you hit the critical angle of attack and she gives you max load factor that she can give, and that's slightly more than the load limit, and you do 10,001 pounds worth of work, it's 1 flex. But if you're doing VA plus 10 and she goes to 5 Gs on a 4.4, that's not 1 flex, that's 10 flexes in 1 hit. If you pull to 6 Gs, that's 100 flexes in 1. It's 100 cycles in 1 flex. So the more you overstress it, it's not necessarily going to break, but it's taking the ultimate life down by a greater amount each time, instead of just the 1. Now the good news is when the manufacturers build these airplanes, there's a 50% load factor buffer there. So a 4.4 G wing can actually go to 6.6, which is where we get into the solid red up there. So above 4.4 to 6.6, we have the structural damage. The wing is now flexing. It's now moving away from its original condition position. If we get above that, now we're breaking things. So that's not good. But can we stall at any speed? Yeah. Even these above maneuvering speeds, she'll still stall. She'll just be at a higher load factor when she does it than where the limit was set by the factory, was set by the design. So the accelerated stall is certainly one that we don't want to mess with, especially at low altitude. And so the title of this is Don't Let Your Enthusiasm Exceed Your Energy. Let's see an example of that.
In the first qualifying session of Race 4 in Windsor, Ontario, Australian pilot Matt Hall, after a strong early section in the track, stalled his plane to face a dramatic situation.
And the final big challenge, level through this blue gate, hard left to the chicane.
Oh! And a skim off the water! What an amazing recovery! Matt Hall! Way too low, skimming the wing in the water, but just pulls the plane up in time.
Roger, mate, cleared to hold 3. We'll just have a look at your tail cam.
A truly amazing recovery, split-second decisions, and true skill to bring his MXS-R plane back safely to the race airport.
I came through the gate 13, I believe it is, with too great an angle to the chicane, and then I broke one of my own rules. I actually looked into the turn, which means I don't fly the aircraft naturally. I pulled on it. I've G-stalled the aircraft, which has rolled me slightly past the knife edge. I've managed to get it back to wings level and recover. I believe I might have skipped twice on the water because I felt 2 impacts, flew it away, and then obviously it was all just trying just to get it back on the ground safely. Everyone was okay.
Matt Hall's experience and perhaps military training allow him to stay safe in this situation, as others confirm the same feeling.
Yeah, you know, thank God it was Matt Hall. There's a guy that was pushing hard, stalled the airplane, and he's one of the best pilots on the planet, and that's why he is where he is now, landing back safely at this airport.
That airplane was doing about 200 knots when it stalled. How much G do you think was on that airplane before it quit? A little or a lot?
And you're saying that extra, you don't even know it, the difference, and so...
Elevator's pretty consistent throughout. The ailerons are just dead nuts neutral from the factory. But the MX is a very different wing, and it's like a happy puppy. You ask it for G, and it's just like, you want some more? I'll give you more. Like, it's a very strange, eager airplane to fly. These guys were the best in the world, are the best in the world still. Matt Hall's still with us, of course, and he still flies that airplane. It's still out there. But he was doing about 200 knots when that happened. Now, the winds for that day at that track during that qualifying session meant that he had a tailwind under that turn. And anytime you have a tailwind, that increases your ground speed and increases the radius of your turn. A NASCAR doing 30 miles an hour versus doing 200 miles an hour, one of them's going to be able to turn tight and one of them's not. Well, he was going fast with the extra added wind off the tail, meaning that his radius was too big, and he tried to ask it for more than the wing could give. Turn required maybe 11 Gs, and he only had 10 Gs of energy. That particular airplane has a 15 G wing with 12 G motor mounts, so where's your real limit there? Is it the wing or is it the motor falling off? That's the motor. So you can actually get more G and your wing is fine, but your motor's gone. No bueno. But he had a boatload of speed. And when the airplane was coming down for the water and he was bringing the wings back to level and orienting that lift vector back away from the ground to get every ounce of lift he had left to prevent him from hitting, what was the attitude of the aircraft? It was like this. What was the flight path of the aircraft? It was like this. How is that relationship important? Where you're pointed versus where you're going. What does that make? Angle of attack. So, critical angle of attack maneuvering speed, speed below which the airplane will stall before it brakes. If the critical angle of attack is commanded at this speed, design load limits will not be exceeded. You command AOA crit above that, you could exceed those design load limits. Also, one more note on maneuvering speed. It is valid for one control input, one axis, one time. We generally think of maneuvering speed as only applying to the elevator. It does not. It applies to your ailerons, it applies to your rudder. So in the aerobatic world, I am full scale deflection with pretty much every single control that I've got. But you will never see me or a good aerobatic pilot, not lumping me in with that, but you'll know the bad ones when you see them going full scale, full scale, full scale, full scale. That's bad. That's like going from plus 9 Gs pull-in to minus 9 Gs. That's an 18 G swing. That's a massive hit to your structure, to put it in terms that we can kind of think about. In the aerobatic airplane, rolling at 400 degrees a second one way to slamming it to 400 degrees a second the other way, that's a big hit. So maneuvering speed, you go full scale, center, full scale, center, full scale, center, full scale, center, rudders, full scale, center, full scale, center. Let those loads neutralize. If you are combining a roll and a pull, if you're working the corners of your yoke, that is called an asymmetric G. It drops your load factor limit by 1/3. You basically drop a category. An aerobatic airplane becomes a utility category becomes normal, normal becomes transport, and transport. There ain't a whole lot left there to maneuver with. So if you watch like Michael Goulian fly his air show, you'll see roll, 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 stop, pull, 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 stop, roll, 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 stop, pull, pull, pull. You'll see them broken up. Never the same unless it's a very low speed into a tumble, well below maneuvering speed. So we don't want to be rolling and pulling or pulling and getting on the rudders necessarily up next to maneuvering speed. Okay, any questions on that? Yes, sir.
So, just trying to understand, so, I mean, maneuvering speed is that's where the G load, or keeps you at a safe G load.
Yes.
But if you don't pull the stick back, you don't have a higher G load, right?
Right.
So why does kicking the rudder or ailerons cause you to break the plane or without the G load?
Sure. So think about the shape of your wing, right? It looks a little something like this. Got a flat side, got a curvy side. If that's an asymmetrical airfoil. Our aerobatic planes have symmetrical airfoils. Same curve, and they make lift with AOA. So here's our wing. But then when you're deflecting your rudder, this is now creating loads. It's just a symmetrical airfoil. Your fuselage is a symmetrical airfoil. And so deflecting it now with wind coming from here, relative wind from here, what do we see about this angle between the nose and the relative wind? It's now making loads on the airframe, mainly around the tail, and it's now flexing this structure. So you get these loads when it's designed load factor limit plus 4.4 minus 1.78 this way. Now you're asking it to make loads this way. And there's a different structure to that part of the aircraft. So we don't necessarily feel those loads. We don't, we feel Q forces, which are the side forces, but we never really talk about them or think about them. And so your question is a very fair one because we're never taught it. No one else is talking about this. ATP, CFI's here. Any of you ever talked about Q loads, Q forces? Nah. But we need to understand where those limits are of the aircraft so we don't break it. Any other questions? Does that satisfy?
So, it sounds like, so basically the load, when you're sideways like that, the load, there is a load there, you just don't know, you just don't sense it.
Yeah,
because it's
and
nothing.
you'll feel it in the seat, because like think about how your ball moves in the inclinometer. Your body's just a ball. It's being affected by the forces that are in the airplane. And so if you're skidding a turn, you'll feel like you're thrown to the outside. If you're in a slip, you're gonna feel like you're kind of falling to the inside. Those are absolutely the same forces that are acting on the airplane, but to a much higher degree because the whole side of the airframe is getting whatever speed, velocity, relative wind that you have going on. And it's generating the load. So like knife edge flight, you'll see an airplane, you'll never see an airplane do a knife edge pass like this. You'll always see them do a knife edge pass like this because the fuselage of the aircraft becomes the lifting surface. The wing isn't doing anything for vertical lift in this orientation. It can only make lift this way or this way. That's all the wing can do in that orientation. It can turn you. So if they're doing a pass like this.
Asymmetrical lift or symmetrical or asymmetrical lift?
Oh, so asymmetrical lift is anytime you have an imbalance in lift. So generally when we're climbing or level flights or anything like that, we are at asymmetrical lift because we're making more up than we are down. So asymmetrical airfoil is just the design of the airfoil and the curvatures between the top and the bottom. We're always generally making asymmetrical lift. And if we aren't, we're accelerating downward towards the Earth at the speed of gravity, or the acceleration due to gravity. So now we're getting into a little bit of the weeds, but I'm happy to discuss it when I'm not on the clock, or we're not trying to get to the sims. Yes, sir?
Yeah. Could you explain the turbulence penetration speed?
Absolutely. So let's go back a little
bit.
So turbulence penetration speed. How many critical angles of attack do we have? I was asked this question in 2007 and I got it wrong. We got a 1, 3, we got a 2, we got a 2. So here's the positive G stall line. Here's the negative G stall line. We can stall an airfoil inverted. Lesson number 4 in the aerobatic syllabus that I was flying was inverted stalls. So you have one positive where the stick is all the way back, and you have one negative where the stick is all the way forward. So if we pay attention to this graphic here, and this is more a generalization to answer the turbulence penetration question. We have a negative load factor limit for our aircraft. For this particular one, it is negative 1.78 Gs as a utility category aircraft. And so the speed that it takes for this airfoil to generate 1.78 negative is significantly slower here at about 100 miles an hour versus the 135 miles an hour of your positive 4.4 G load factor. So generally, if you have a turbulence penetration speed for your airplane, it will be significantly slower than maneuvering speed to be more in line or closer to this negative G speed because Mother Nature is chaos. Mother Nature, especially if you're flying through thunderstorms, do not fly through thunderstorms, number 1, okay? But inside of a thunderstorm, you have severe updrafts and downdrafts on the magnitude between 6,000 feet per minute of vertical up and down. And you could hit a 6,000 up and a 6,000 down, ba-boom! And you want that wing to not generate a whole boatload of load factor when it suddenly has a very different relative wind. Because that's all the wing knows is the angle of attack. Difference between flight path and chord line. But if Mother Nature is moving that relative wind, it's going to generate all the loads. That's where turbulence comes from. Differences in direction, speed, and potentially density of the air that you're flying through, moving that relative wind around.
Rob?
Yes, sir.
If it has the two different, like the chart you had there, two different speeds, that should be listed on the limits in the operating handbook, right?
And it's not.
It's not. Yeah.
And I can't tell you a turbulence penetration speed for a 172. Any ATPs here? Mike, what do you typed in?
Fuga.
In the Fuga.
Yeah.
Not exactly transport category.
No.
Do you have a turbulence penetration speed? No. So it's normally a transport category aircraft thing. Go ahead.
The King Air 350 has a VB, you know. It has
Yeah. Do you know what the speed is?
Yes.
Give me the number.
170 and the VA is 181.
Okay, so an 11 knot difference between the two. Yeah.
That varies for weight.
Absolutely, it varies for weight. So all of these speeds,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
gross weight number.
and it goes down in a ratio of something between delta between your max gross listed and your actual weight, and there's a mathematical formula for all of that to figure out those numbers. And so we want to be slower so the total energy in the system is not one that could generate loads on the aircraft that could break the aircraft. That's the whole point of this. So if you get gusts of plus 10 and you're at your maneuvering speed already, you are now exceeding VA by 10 during that hit and capable of generating forces higher than what the load factor limit for the aircraft was. So that's why we have generally a slower, breaking the controller, a slower turbulence penetration speed. And so if you are in turbulence in your aircraft, slow down below VA, enough above VS that you can keep control of the aircraft. So if you're noticing gusts on your airspeed indicator, try to note what the max is, slow down below VA by at least that much. So if it peaks, it's only tapping VA. And maintain attitude. Let it ride everything else. Maintain attitude and speed, let it ride the turbulence. Stay 20 nautical miles away from thunderstorms, things like that, but sometimes they're hard to see. Yes, sir?
So there's like the rudder outside like a critical angle of attack?
100%, yeah. We generally don't have the control authority to get it there and actually stall the rudder. Even in the aerobatic airplanes, I can't think of a time that I've stalled the rudder.
Well, you could store it in a crosswind. You know, if you correct the crosswind with VMC, when you demonstrate VMC with one engine out.
Yes.
And then the rudder, I mean the vertical wing will store if you go full rudder. This is why instructor, in some airplanes, we should block the rudder so the trainee doesn't go full rudder. Because if you store the wing, the vertical wing, then you've gone. You know, you most likely won't recover.
See, I'm an edge of the envelope guy. So you're absolutely right. I wasn't thinking about the multi-scenario where you've lost an engine. You can stall the rudder there. But the rudder was compensating for an asymmetrical thrust out on a wing. If you do stall it there, pull the throttle back to idle. Now the thing it was compensating for is gone, and you get it back flying again.
And if it stalls, by the
You still-
time the reaction, you will be gone, or you will be.
Yeah. You still have to get the power off though to recover
You're
that.
doing your best Bob Hoover maneuver you can.
Yeah, you're doing the Bob Hoover stuff. You know, now you're right, it can happen there. Be aware of it. So the other point of some of this exercise is to understand where these dark corners are, where these limits are, so that we can recognize, avoid, and if we fail at those two, the recovery phase is the next thing that needs to be taught. So when I'm teaching my MEIs or when I'm doing MEI training, I don't block the rudder. I just have a boatload of altitude and nobody in the back.
But some airplanes you won't recover, like the Twin Comanche of the Baron, you know.
I've done some big things in a Baron.
There is a really good video what you should look from Martin Poley with Rosendahl, I think his name is,
Okay.
a warbird guy, who he has all the theory, demonstrates that, and you know, that's a killing zone, you know. So.
Yeah.
And it depends on the airplanes, you know, some
Yes.
airplanes have a small tail, some airplanes have a bigger tail. So
Some have a small tail, some have a flat bottom, which really changes their characteristics, especially when they lose control and where they want to be. We're a little bit beyond the scope of the presentation at this point, but generally airplanes do want to fly, and they will find themselves, if given enough room and time and they aren't in some other auto-rotative state, they will find their way back to flying. Auto-rotation is a whole nother deal. That's the spin in the develop phase. And if you don't have the control authority to get out of that, yeah, you're done. But you have to screw up about 4 steps to get into that state. So once you first brakes, you're not dead yet, but if you don't react to it properly, you're gonna have a bad day. But it will be over quick. So aware, avoid, recover, don't let it develop. But as far as protecting the aircraft, understanding what maneuvering speed gets you and what its limitations are will help you get there. Did we answer your question about the rudder stall? Okay. I have also, and Rich Stoll and I worked with this a little bit, mainly in the decathlon is what we were testing, getting to just above VS and giving sudden full-scale aileron inputs to stall the wingtips and just to feel what that sensation was. There's a little vibration there and it kind of drops outside. Really benign, very hard to do. It took me probably 10 attempts to get what Rich was talking about to happen. So it's a very rare kind of thing, but generally we're not using a whole lot of aileron in stalls. And if you are, I teach coordinating rudder and aileron inputs just like we would normally have to have anyway, because those aerodynamics don't change. Okay, so we're doing okay on time. I have put this graphic up intentionally this way because I hate when the relative wind is on the horizon. Because relative wind is determined by our flight path. Its relationship with angle of attack is very important. So we have an airplane here. What is its angle of attack? Don't know. I love that answer. We have an airplane here. What is its angle of attack?
We don't know.
We don't know. Why? Because we don't have a flight path. We don't have a flight path, so we don't have a relative wind. Okay? What is its angle of attack? 0. What is its angle of attack? 90. Okay? So pitch attitude did not matter. Pitch attitude did not matter. So relative wind here I've put on a little bit of an angle. It's mainly representing like a VY climb. We have the angle here in A shown, relative wind to chord line, that's our angle of attack. We have our lift vector, and we have a resultant force. The resultant force here is not as accurately drawn as it should be, but to get into the weeds a little bit, the resultant force acts 90 degrees to the average relative wind. The average relative wind is the deflected relative wind by 1/2 the downwash angle to form the actual interaction where the mathematics are happening and the physics are happening with our wing. So we know that the air comes up, over, and then flows down off the back of the wing. That angle is measurable, and if we cut it in half, we actually get how leading up to the leading edge, the air is deflected and pulled into that low pressure that we know is up top. We know it's there. And it gets pulled into that before it actually interacts with that leading edge. Now, the 90-degree part is the important part of that. It deflects the lift vector from vertical towards the rear of the airplane, or at least from perpendicular to the chord line towards the rear of the aircraft, and it creates a force rearward. In terms of 4 forces, we've already talked about thrust, we've talked about lift, we've mentioned a little bit of drag, but how many components to drag are there? 2. We've got parasite and the byproduct of lift, induced drag. We can measure the distance between the resultant force and the lift as it's depicted in any kind of tilt rearward is drag. If we are making 1 G of lift, let's say that that's here, this is 1 G. We can see how this is a very small gap. But as we increase lift, which makes the accelerative forces to make G, we can see how the distance between the tips of those arrows is much greater. That's how we measure our induced drag. So the more you pull, the more AOA you have, the more lift you make. Is that lift free? No. It has a byproduct, which is drag. Drag does what to our energy? Takes it away, which will have what result on our airspeed? It'll decrease it. So if we don't want to slow down while we're maneuvering in our steep turn at 2 Gs, how do we counteract that drag? Add power. Is power free, or does it come with some tendencies in our propeller-driven aircraft? Yeah. Which direction do those tendencies go? Left. So when I pull back on the yoke, I make more lift, but I make more byproduct of lift. So I need to add power. When I add power, I need to add right rudder. Wish I had a nickel for every time I had to say or got told right rudder. Ooh, boy, I'd have a fleet of extras. So one control input of pulling back on the yoke required at least 2 others. That drag is going to slow us down. When is that drag going to happen? When I pull. So can I anticipate that drag? 100%. Mike, you're my lead sim. You're my lead instructor. Let's do this. Come on, brother. I'm drag. I'm gonna sit. I'm drag. Relax. Is this a fair start? If I have to counteract drag, do I want to react to it? Or do I want to anticipate it? Yeah. Go! No shit. So we know when the drag is going to happen because we, the pilot, make it. We create it. So before I go to pull, I'm going to be adding a little bit of power. That power makes a little bit of left turning tendency. So my foot and my hand are connected. In the steep turn, we had to go from 0 bank to 45, 50, 60, wherever we want to be. How did we roll an airplane? We create differential what? Lift. Is lift free? No, it's got a byproduct. So this more lift wing gets pulled to the outside. That's adverse yaw. How do we compensate for that? Rudder in the direction of the roll. So what should be your first input when you go to roll? The aileron or the rudder? By just the minutest amount of time, ba-ba, rudder roll, ba-ba, lead it. Not enough to be like, ugh. We're not skidding. Just a little pressure. Just a little pressure. Give me a little left rudder pressure. Give me a little pressure. Roll the aircraft. When we get to about 30 degrees, where's the lift vector gone? Is it now pure vertical? No. Where's the airplane going to want to go? Down. So as you approach your 30 degrees, what do you need to do? You need to pull. But we know if we pull, we make more drag. So as we roll through 30, we're smoothly coming on the power, coming on that back pressure. Maybe relaxing that rudder a tiny bit. Maybe. But I want you to think about the pilot inputs that you need to make. If we want to roll the aircraft head to hip, those are the ailerons. If we want to yaw the aircraft shoulder to shoulder, those are the rudders. If we want to pitch feet to head or head to feet, that's the elevator. And every single one of those control inputs that you're going to make require at least 2 to 3 other control inputs to happen. I want you to think about, if I want to climb, what do I need to do if I wanted a constant airspeed? If I want to descend, what do I need to do with those opposing control inputs to descend at a constant airspeed?
Rob.
Yes, sir.
Oh, Rob.
Oh, geez, I thought you said Rob. Pitch, power, airspeed, maneuvering, climbing, descending, accelerating, descending, lift vector, AOA. These are the words that I want you to kind of have in your heads as you're going out to teach these things, as you're going into the sim. The instructors here, I want you to be thinking about what you would tell the pilot to do in a certain situation if you want to get an outcome out of the aircraft. So if we want the nose to go up, we want to give the instruction, pull back on the yoke. Focus on the pilot input, not the desired outcome. Okay? That way we are controlling us, controlling the machine. The outcome, if we're teaching, hey, bring the nose up, that's magic. How do we make that happen? It's an input, it's a pilot input. Okay, so we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. We've got 6 sims, that's 3 per sim, that's perfect. How many instructors do I have? 1, 2, okay, perfect. Okay, so that table has 3. You guys are going to stick together in a sim.
There's actually, people should have cards on their side.
Oh, you're assigned? Okay, if it doesn't work out okay, all right, so you stand up. What's on your, we didn't do this Wednesday, so it's different. Do you have names or do you have?
Sim 9.
Okay, all right.
A, B, and C.
Stand up by number. Okay, Sim 6. Everybody, Sim 6, raise your hand.
We should have 7 to 12.
Oh, 7, that's right, 7. Sim 7. Okay, all you Sim 7s get together.
She's an A.
She's an 8?
Yeah.
I just want 7s right now.
I'm a 7. Okay,
Yeah.
7.
You have 7 sims because they didn't need one there, and I've got the 7 sims.
Oh, are we 6 through 12 then?
I've already.
We can move someone, yeah.
Yes, I'm on 4.
All right, sim instructors, it's now time for you guys to take command of your peoples. I'll just let you do that. I'm not going to direct it. Thank you very much. I'll be floating around in there. We're going to practice some of this stuff. So you're going to have maneuvers to fly. Your sim instructors will take you through that. Make mistakes. It's fine.
Sim 8, anyone?
You're 8?
I'm 8. I was 8.
The ball, that little slide, which goes back and forth, is your ball. Yes.
Okay.
Okay?
Could you go over that bag here? 10, 20, 30?
Roy, next one, come on.
It's very tight. Is that okay?
Yep, now you can go ahead and kind of trim it for 80 again.
See if this is helping. Touch like and hold wings level. The wings level is we're gonna let it challenge on the sim. So have to keep looking.
Left tail right. Left tail.
Welcome back. Okay, did everybody get through 1 through 4? You only got through 3. That's okay. Got through 3. Perfect. That's all right. Learning some quality lessons there about energy management throughout the maneuvers. During the number 1 with the level climb and accelerate, how many people initially, once you got up to the altitude, climbed up to 500 feet or so, pulled back the power to level off? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Then how did you eventually accelerate up to 110? What did you have to do? Had to put the power back in, a little bit of nose down as it accelerated, all that kind of stuff. Cool. So if you generally climbing at VY, want to accelerate to cruise speed when you get to altitude, how are we going to make the aircraft change energy states? We have to leave that power. And as someone who gives a lot of check rides, it's impressive how the students and candidates will be climbing at VY up to their cruise cross-country performance, and then they'll level off and the airplane is plowing air like a boat trying to get up on plane. It's plowing air, not accelerating. Now the energy that the engine is giving them, they pull it back to their cruise RPM 2350 or 2400 or whatever they had planned, and it will eventually over time finally accelerate out to that, but over the amount of time it takes to accelerate, they're going to make 30 trim inputs as the airplane's trying to climb and descend and going all over the sky. Whereas if we just anticipate, hey, leave the power, let it accelerate using that excess power, that excess energy, we'll be lowering the nose as the airplane kind of gets up on step like a boat does, gets up on the water. We'll be lowering the nose, we'll be feeling the pressures in the yoke, which the sim doesn't do an awesome job of, but we'll be feeling those pressures. And then once it does get up to that speed, we'll make a power change, a trim change, lean it out. We don't have to touch it again. So we make 1 or 2 changes instead of 30 over the course of a long period of time. We just use that excess power, get it up to speed. Then once we're at our equilibrium, our life gets easier and we can start preparing for the descent. Whether that's an hour and a half away or coming up pretty quick, whether we got approaches and charts and procedures to review and load, we're in good shape there. So just a simple little level off. Just a simple little level off lets us use some of these pitch, power, airspeed, accelerating, decelerating, lets us use those concepts that we've talked about. Okay, with the steep turn. Now, the goal of the steep turn in the ACS is that you perform a level 360-degree turn at a constant airspeed and bank angle. We weren't looking for ACS today, but what were some things you noticed while you were doing your steep turns in terms of the energy of the aircraft? What did you notice? You don't have to raise your hand, you can just shout out, it's fine. Nobody noticed anything?
The simulator seems to take a lot more power than the airplane.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
In other situations, this machine has a lot more power than the airplane. Climb rate, etc.
No
During
doubt.
the steep turn, it took a lot of power, more power than I expected.
Okay, yeah. So part of the thing that we talked about in the first session was how much power do you have available to you, or how much throttle position do you have available to you? You got 100% all the way down to 0%. Use what you need at the time. Be willing to use what you need at the time. And in the real airplane, we have some high horsepower applications and some low horsepower applications. So the appropriate amount of horsepower in my world is more. I very rarely ever have enough. But if you only have a limited amount, be willing to use all of it. Okay. How about altitude maintenance? Were we able to kind of maintain altitudes or anything like that? That's all right. It's a sim. It's not a check ride day. It's not the real world. But did you notice that you had to vary the amounts you were pulling, vary the amounts of throttle that you had? Maybe when you rolled out wings level, the airplane would try to accelerate or climb on you, pull that power back when you were done with the maneuver. Anybody notice that? A little bit? Okay. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, I do notice in this, when you get to 45 degrees, it starts to tuck in on itself even more.
Yeah.
And you find...
You talking overbanking?
It overbanks on its own, actually. And then this is, the yoke is over like this.
Yep.
You see the left turn, and then it all gets hoovered up.
So real world, that should happen in the airplane as well. You get an overbanking tendency just due to the differing radii of the wings, and one being on the outside versus the inside, and different speeds, which means different amount of lift on that wing. And amount of dihedral that you have tends to counteract that depending on the airplane design, all kinds of elements that go into that from the manufacturer, which is cool. But your job as a pilot is to put in the control input that you detect that you need at the time to make the airplane do what you want. So if you determine that you need a little opposite aileron in the maneuver to maintain, cool. Give it to it. Notice those things. And know that it's on the normal side. By normalizing or knowing what's normal with the aircraft, we are better able to see discrepancies. If you have a normal, you will know when something has deviated and when you need to make a correction or a change. All right? Chandelles. Who here was the first time they'd ever done a chandelle? Yep, yeah. I don't know if you got to it or not. Cool. Now, chandelle, it's a commercial maneuver. I'm not super concerned about the quality of the maneuver, but what power setting did you need to use? Full. What back pressure did you finish the turn with versus finishing the maneuver with? Did you notice where the yoke was when you finished your 180 degrees of turn versus then what happened afterwards with the acceleration? Can we make a connection to accelerating at a constant airspeed, getting up to our cruise altitude, and then lowering the nose with full power and accelerating out of that? All we did with the chandelle was combine little elements, a mini steep turn, a little shallow steep turn, if you will, with the constant airspeed climb and level off in acceleration. We cut up one procedure in the airplane, cut up a different procedure, and then stitched them together to make a whole different maneuver in the form of the chandelle. In aerobatics, we do that exact same thing. We only have rolls, loops, hammerheads, and spins. We just cut them up at different parts to make all different maneuvers. So when you watch the air show out there, try to see what combinations of those four things you can see. Lazy eights. Who got through did anybody not get through the lazy eights? Did not? No problem. Lazy eight is just a maneuver where we are exchanging airspeed for altitude, and then as the wing loses its lift, the nose falls down. It's a stability exercise. Comes down and starts to regain its energy, and as it regains its energy, it comes back up because it wants to seek equilibrium. We're just making it do it in a turn. You could do the exact same maneuver by just setting a back pressure, letting the nose come up, letting it slow down, then the nose drops, then it speeds up, then the nose comes back up, and you don't even have to do it in a turn, but we teach it in a turn because it just adds another little element to it and keeps a little bit of the pitch attitudes in check. Above 25 nose up, 60 degrees of bank and 10 degrees nose down, we technically need to have parachutes on in the airplane. So for some of these maneuvers, like the accelerated stalls, which we didn't do, but we talked about, we generally practice those in a 45 degree bank so that we can change 180 degrees of heading instead of changing 180 degrees of pitch. But you can still stall there too. So that's a little bit of the why we do some of those maneuvers that way. Okay. I know at least one of you started maneuvers 5 and 6 on our maneuver sheet, but this is where we want to get into the ultimate correlation for what we've done today. We've done these normal maneuvers using the power in a variety of power settings. Next thing we're going to do are the high threat. We are learning these baseline fundamental skills so that when we are faced with engine fire in flight, engine failure on takeoff, if we have the mindset that we already know how to maneuver the aircraft, maneuver it to its limits, and get the most out of the energy we have available to us, we are better able to handle these things. So we're going to go back to the sims now. We're going to try to take some of the elements of what we've learned about managing the energy, how the energy changes with pitch, how we make the aircraft turn effectively. Some people here stalled it too. Okay, you've been to the edge of stall, cool. And we're going to present some threats. In the real world, in the real airplane, we are trained to deal with these things. Sim instructors, when you fire up, just refire the high altitude scenario on the sim. And engine fire in flight. What do we need to do?
Cut off the fuel.
Cut off the fuel, why?
Because fuel burns.
Fuel burns. So what's our ultimate goal?
Reduce fuel.
Reduce. Kind of keep going. We want to put the fire out. Number one goal, get the fire out. That involves cutting off the fuel. In this case, just go for mixture auto cutoff. Don't worry about the fuel selector and all the other procedures. This is not aircraft specific. Let's just get the mixture auto cutoff for today. Okay, now we've got a fire in our airplane. Anybody here ever had a birthday party?
We gotta blow out the candle.
You gotta blow out the candles. How are we gonna blow out those candles? We just cut off the fuel and we don't have thrust. Dive. We have to turn altitude into airspeed. And the fire is gonna go out in today's scenario when you hit the yellow arc. Okay? From the yellow arc, the fire will be out. What's next? My other favorite question besides why. What's next?
Don't crash.
Don't crash. Okay, let's get a little more narrow.
Land the airplane.
Land the aircraft, okay.
Slow down.
Slow down. To what? Best glide. Let's call it 60, 70. 70 is a nice number for the sims. Okay, so we're gonna slow to 70. How are we gonna do that? Pull up. We're gonna exchange now what for what? Yeah, we're gonna exchange that 120, 130 knots you got by going to the yellow arc for some altitude. Altitude at best glide gives us more what? Distance. And if you were doing a dive not towards an airport, you might need it. Okay, so now we've preserved our energy, lengthened our time in the air, yawned a big yawn. Oh, wait, sorry. He was up late. Now what are we aiming for? Say we're going towards a field. What are we aiming for? Familiar or unfamiliar? Unfamiliar. What would you rather aim for?
Familiar.
Yeah. So we know we want to land this thing. We know we want to land it at an airport. Everybody here has landed at an airport, correct? Most of the time in your real airplane, when you've landed at your airport, you started that process from where? Downwind. So what are we aiming for with this best glide?
Downwind entry.
Downwind, point of beam, maybe midfield at pattern altitude. Because every landing you've done, for the most part, started from this position, or real close to it. How many people here have done exclusively straight in long 10-mile finals? Okay, anybody ever done just a long straight in final? How much jockeying were you doing of the power to get there? It's unfamiliar territory. You don't know what you need. But from the downwind, we're close. We're there. And if our goal is to touch down on the midfield, how much runway do we have to be short? Half. How much runway do you have to be long? Half. Airplane in the sim is simulating a 172, which if you use the proper technique, you can get stopped in 500 feet. Ground roll, max braking effort. How do I identify 500 feet of distance? Anybody know?
2 blue lights plus.
2 blue lights plus? Potentially, yeah. Landing lights are 200 feet apart. Runway stripe, center line. It's 120 feet long with an 80-foot gap. So 2.5 runway stripes, 500 feet. That's how quickly you should be able to get this airplane stopped once you touch down. If you've managed your energy, maintained that 70 and adjusting your approach, you'll be in good shape. What do flaps do? Drag. 10 degrees of flaps get you a little more lift benefit than drag. What's the opposite word of benefit? English, hard. Penalty. Okay? Anything more than that, you might as well just dump them all. 20 doesn't do anything for you, 30 doesn't do anything for you, but bring you down and add drag. So once you know that field is made, dump them. Go ahead.
Dumb question.
Sure.
If the 10 degrees of flaps gives you more lift than drag, why don't we use that for our entire glide?
Because there is a drag penalty. So if you're looking for max, take away all drag as much as you can. Also, don't be surprised if the propeller stops while you're at best glide. That's actually better for you. The glide tables in your performance section of your POHs, actually it's in the emergency, it's in chapter 3. It's in the emergency section, is assuming a windmilling propeller. How does a propeller windmill? What's making that happen? Wind. Wind moves through it, it's an airfoil, it makes lift, which causes rotation. That rotation is opposed by the compression of the cylinder, so you're overpowering a resistance in there, and the byproduct of lift is drag. So there is an induced drag on the propeller, which is hurting your airplane. Also, a rotating propeller has the properties of a flat plate, not of a skinny little blade. If it stops, that's better. Being a young and dumb pilot, FAA, plug your ears, I did once turn off an engine in flight, slow down to best glide. I was surprised when the prop stopped. I was very happy when the starter worked and it restarted. Just trust me, okay? So as long as your engine still has compression, most likely your propeller will stop. If it's a catastrophic engine failure, which we are not simulating, it may keep windmilling if there's no compression left in the engine. So no surprises there. All right, so what's our goal? What's our goal with this engine fire in flight? Number 1, put the fire out. Go ahead.
Is there anything to side slipping that plane in one direction or the other to put the fire out?
No. So side slips are used if you got a wing fire. Generally, the wing that has the most electronic stuff run through it is going to be the one that catches fire. So the wing that's got your pitot heat or a piezoelectric stall warning or any strobe, snaps, that kind of stuff. Flat motor, normally that's like the left wing is going to catch fire. And there you're trying to put the fire away from the cabin. In this case, it's going to be an engine fire. Slip is not necessarily going to help you. But a great question, and I love that you're thinking about other scenarios. That's good correlation level. I love that. Very good. So put the fire out using exchanging altitude for airspeed. Now turn that airspeed back into altitude, whatever you can get. If it's a couple hundred feet, awesome. That's a couple more 100 feet you can glide. Aim for midfield point of beam on the downwind. Start your landing approach from there. If you fly too far away, you won't make it back, and you'll have learned something. Flaps, when you absolutely positively cannot miss the runway, use them all. All right? Any questions there? Cool. The second scenario we're going to do is the impossible 180. I call it the improbable 180 because I've done too darn many of them. One of them I had to do, I was the lead ship in a 4-ship formation, and I had to go underneath number 4 on my return back to the runway. The FAA happened to be there that day, and I got to explain to them what was going on. I got patted on the back, which was good. And the other scenario I did, we didn't make it back to the airport, but there was a nice 4-lane road with a suicide lane, luckily. More about that if you want to listen to Chapter 7 of the Spread Aviation Podcast, or Episode 7 of the Spread Aviation Podcast, we'll talk about it there. But for the improbable 180, what we're going to do is we're going to take off from Portage Airport. Instructors, you'll load the scenario on the ground, runway 27 POV. Winds will be 300 at about 10, so it's slightly out of the right. We're going to simulate an engine failure above the altitude at which the aircraft should have the energy to, if you do it right, proper technique, return to the airport. This scenario here is not to be tested in the real airplane on the ground, but if you want to try your airplane up at altitude with some specific criteria so you can track your progress and how you actually did, take it up to 6,000. Try it there. But we're going to do it in the sim today because we can't get hurt today. So because the wind is out of the right, when you have this engine failure, which way do you want to turn? To the right. You want to go into the wind. It will compress the radius of the turn without necessarily affecting the performance of the airplane. What bank angle do you want for this turn? 45. It is equal amounts turn and lift and up. How hard do you want to pull? Yes. Pretty darn. You want to tickle your stall warning. Problem with the sim. In the real airplane, they're set up so the stall warning activates about 5 knots before your actual stall. In the sim, it activates when you stall. But you know your angle of attack indicator is your yoke. So before you take off, pull it all the way back, then back it off a little bit. That's going to be your goal. If you do this right, that turnaround to the nearest piece of asphalt, which is the corner of the runway, should take about 7 seconds. 7 seconds, how much altitude are you going to lose? Maybe 100, maybe 150 feet. But if you're pointed right back at the corner of the runway, locked in best glide speed, now with the tailwind, you got a shot. Save the flaps till you know you've made it. Or if you need that last 150 feet of, I need a little bit more, 70 knots to 40, that's 30 knots of energy that you can use to just kind of get there. But you only have that available when that last shot of flaps comes in. But you know it's there. Hopefully, if we do this right, we don't even need it. If we do this right, we don't even need it. Any questions on that maneuver?
Why wouldn't you just increase the pitch from 7 to bleed off that airspeed, turn that into altitude rather than using the flaps?
It's a little bit of a combination of both. But as the flaps come in, it lowers your stall speed from VS1 to VSO. So if you just pitch, you're giving up about 5 knots of energy. So by going for the flaps, you get all of that. But it's a last shot. That's all it is. Okay? Good question though. Yes, ma'am.
So whenever you start to make the turn, you had said pull back. Don't you have to push forward to get to your best glide?
If you're climbing at 80,
okay,
you're faster. However, you may find that your first move does need to be a little bit of an unload to not let that drag and pitch and everything where we're pointed away from gravity cause that airspeed to drop like crazy. So the pitch control during this is going to be a pull in the 45, potentially to AOA crit. But if you need to lower the nose in order to maintain that best glide through the turn, absolutely do so. But there's a balance here where you're targeting a speed and a performance out of the aircraft with the energy that you've got. And the only manipulator you have for it is pitch, using gravity, exchanging altitude for that speed. So a fantastic question to ask now. When you're in the real sim, now you're a bit primed for it. Typically, I don't give that detail because this is an experiment and I want you to make mistakes. Okay, cool. She asked the question. Now the group is better prepared. Now we have maybe new mistakes to make out there, and that's okay. If you have questions during this, happy to help out while we're there. But for the next, we have 50 minutes. By the time we get over there, we'll have about 45 to go and practice these next 2 maneuvers. Attack. That's the mindset I want you to have.
And I'm having engine failure automatic? Well, it's automatic as I can do. Okay.
Maybe it's coming, maybe it's not.
It's not. Heading westbound on course. Say, hold the course here. Nice day, huh? Can't wait to get to Oshkosh to see the show. Distracting me. Just pull the flaps. Ooh, look at that. Excellent.
I think you said turn right up when.
Well, we're going to see how this goes.
Right. Now return. You see where the airport is?
I'm lost. Oh, here we go. I got disoriented big time.
Getting seasick. Don't overdo the rudders. You're gonna. I'm gonna take it out. Well, that's why he said that.
800 EGL.
What was it, 800?
800 EGL.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really, John, Craig?
45 degrees. Look here, 45. And reduce your pitch. 45 degrees. So look outside.
So, over here, then.
Roll's coming up. So now aim to go that way. Aim to the empty middle field. Okay. Best glide. Yeah, so that's go towards it. Good. Avoid the trees. Avoid the trees. If you're dying, avoid this tree. Alright, yeah, I crashed on that one last time. Look somewhere else. Good. Okay, now you're close to the ground. We made it to the runway, right? Okay. Flaps. When you get closer to ground, avoid stall.
You're supposed to be in the simulator?
Level the wings. Level
You're
the
on
wings.
5. We had to move it.
Good. Go back. There you go. You land on taxi.
Landed on the taxiway.
It didn't stop. That's good.
We're real low. We'll try it here though. Let's see if we can do it. Right, so roll that 45 quickly. Yeah. You got it. This is gonna be pretty tight. And I start seeing on this window first. Oh no, never mind. We got it. Go for the car to the airport. Anyway. Good.
Behind you is fuel and the fuel pump is runway behind you. Yeah, there's some kids that they
That's pretty low.
That was about as tight as you could get it, I think.
Yeah. So as a critique, you just backed off the bank angle and the G just a little bit there in the last 30 degrees of turn. And that was a little bit of a difference maker, but was definitely survivable. Good job.
There's an Old Spice commercial from the 1970s. Experience is the thing you don't have until after you needed it the most. Today, when we first started, we didn't necessarily have the experience to handle that scenario. Then you got it in the sim, and you handled it better afterwards. Does this mean that you're 100% ready to go in the real world, in the real airplane? No. But at least you now have some tools in your toolbox to take your favorite airplane up to a nice, high, safe altitude. Take note of your altitude, airspeed headings, maybe slow it down to VR and kind of set up like it's a real takeoff, full power, climb out. Practice this stuff. See how much room it takes, how much time it takes, how much energy you need, how much energy the airplane needs to get this to maneuver. Coming down at best glide. After the engine failure, we're dealing with an engine fire. After an engine fire, we're dealing with an engine failure and a forced landing. Up at altitude, pull your throttle back to idle. Set up your best glide, and then start some turns at different bank angles, and just see how much altitude it takes to turn 180, to turn 360. So now in the future, when you have an engine failure, airspeed, best glide, best place to land. Don't just find it, go to it. Best place, oh, it's over there. Doo-doo. Good job, you're flying away from it. Go to it. Fly over top. And now start your spiral down with the data that you gained previously, knowing how much altitude you use every 180, every 360. With the goal of being on the point of beam, on the downwind, at 1,000 feet AGL, you can now start doing the math. Hey, how much altitude do I have left? How much can I maneuver in that to set myself up to be at that spot? Right now, all of that information, probably a bit of an unknown to you. But by going out and practicing with this mindset of managing the energy and knowing how much it takes to get around, you better set yourself up for success. You are now adding tools to your toolbox. And in that way, you won't have any problems letting your enthusiasm exceed your energy. Thank you very much for joining my talk. I'm Rob Dumovic. Go out and fly awesome.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Hey, girls.